Divine Mercy Radio Catholic 540 AM is proud to present Come to Me, Encounters with the Eucharist, a local program that shares the stories of people who have been drawn to or deepen their faith in the Catholic Church by encountering Jesus in the Eucharist. Welcome your host of Come to Me, Lydia Tatum.
Thank you for joining us for this month's episode of Come to Me, Encounters with the Eucharist, where we will hear another inspiring story of encounter as Jesus continues to call each of us to meet him in the Eucharist. In the Eucharist, we are called to new life, are nurtured by his grace, and as St. John Damascene says, are inflamed in order that we might be united in communion with Christ and with one another. On this episode of Come to Me, we will hear how Jesus in the Eucharist beckons us to unity in the Church. Today, I am joined by Matt Klimczak. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we are excited to have you in the studio and to hear about how Jesus called to you from the Eucharist and really turned your whole world around as you learned how to love God. So tell us, as we begin, where you are in our diocese.
I am in Raleigh at Holy Name of Jesus Cathedral.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I hear you have a pretty good community there at Holy Name. At what point did you come into the church? What year?
I came in Easter Vigil of 25.
Of 25. So we're coming up on a year, and your community's already kind of pulled you in, and you are walking alongside other new Catholics or soon-to-be new Catholics. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful journey. Very good. So can you begin sharing with us a bit about your background, about your upbringing, and how your early life prepared you to be ready to hear Jesus' call on your heart?
Right. Well, I think I have kind of like as normal a story as one might have. I grew up in a kind of a split household. My dad had been a Catholic. He's a lapsed Catholic, and it didn't really play a role in my life going forward. But I was lucky. I had a mother who was a staunch Christian, kind of in the evangelical Pentecostal space, charismatic Christianity, talking in tongues, that kind of thing. And so, the themes were there growing up, but I don't think it was I never got experience to ministry what Christians did as part of their vocation and living with what Jesus taught them and moving that into the world. And I had never gone to church regularly. And so while, it was a Christian culture and what I lived in, there wasn't a relationship there going forward. And so going on, for me, I just went to school, had friends, wasn't much of a troublemaker really, and eventually made it to college where, again, still learning about the world, still trying to learn my craft. And then it was eventually, I had, met people at college who were kind of part of that young life crew, Young Life or crew, or organizations like Ratio Christi who focus on apologetics. That was kind of my first time meeting people who were on fire for Christ, and they had a huge impact on me. But I was still indecisive and just trying to learn as much about the world as I could. And then eventually college stops, and then you start going into, your professional career. And, it's been almost 6 years now. And, it's kind of sad to say, but I mean, working in corporate America, I had to think and say, okay, well, I'm going to be doing this for 30, 40 years. To what end? Mm-hmm. And that's really where it started. Eventually, I meet more people in my professional career that were Christians, and who actually I was able to go into a Bible study where we would actually dig into Scripture, and it was actually multiple Catholics who were converting to kind of like more megachurch faith communities. So I had that kind of experience or exposure to that and what their concerns were, and dealing with talking to people who had families who weren't always on board with those kinds of transitions, which, and I think we'll get to it later in the program, but made an impact on me when I decided to, pick up the torch and, become a disciple. But from there, I mean, once I decided, okay, now's the time to go for this, I had to pick a church.
Yeah. And
if anyone's singing, I think it's Ready to Harvest on YouTube. It's kind of a program where on YouTube where they study all the various denominations and what makes them different. And I just knew, it's among baptized believers, it is a mess. Trying to consider what's the truth, what do I follow when my soul's on the line. So from there, I decided, among all the other things, I wanted to explore the Catholic faith. A lot of it was the otherworldliness of it. There's the world, and then that never really fulfilled me. That never really spoke to my soul. So when I looked at, high church denominations or, churches like the Catholic Church, that really spoke to my soul as far as what meshed best with me. And then once I started that journey, well, then it was discovering all of the other things about Catholicism. So
in discerning through the different denominations, it sounds like high church liturgy really spoke to you versus megachurch, which is what you were kind of seeing your peers move towards and drift away from the Catholic Church in some ways.
Yeah.
And that was very much a part of what they called worship wars in the Protestant world in the 90s and 2000s, where they were drifting that way. And the Catholic Church did have a lot of that happen, where there was a sense of fear that that was more attractional to be entertained rather than to go and to be in Mass, where heaven meets earth and we step outside of time and we actually worship. So as you were discerning through the high church denominations that had more of the liturgy, like I'm assuming the Episcopal, Anglican, Lutheran kind of denominations, what stood out to you about Catholicism?
For me, among all the different denominations, I'd have to say authority. Thinking about, where does our faith come from? What did Christ say to the apostles? And then taking that all the way down the line, considering church history and the councils, it made more sense to me to go into the Catholic direction. And then from there, joining adult faith formation, OCIA at Holy Name of Jesus Cathedral. I mean, that's once I got there, it was just a system that fully opened my eyes to all of the different aspects of the faith, and then eventually found Jesus in the Eucharist. So
that's amazing. So the OCIA process at Holy Name, you shared a little bit before we got on air about that process, and there's one aspect that I'm very excited about that you were sharing that you're actually getting to do now, and that is to be a Catholic companion. Can you kind of speak to what that role is in OCIA and why you feel like that is such a needed position in this process?
Well, for me, so I haven't been involved with the process all that much. I think this is the first year that the Catholic Companion has been formally introduced into the process. And so my understanding with it is a member of the laity that starts out at the beginning of the process for new candidates and catechumens who they're not necessarily a sponsor of a catechumen or a candidate, but they are someone who is assigned to be with a candidate or catechumen during the initial process, someone that can bounce questions off them, someone you know, who you can meet and know and come to with questions during that initial process before you get assigned a sponsor to go on. So it's actually a critical role and something that they wanted to let new neophytes in the faith, newly baptized and confirmed people. That's a position that they wanted to get us into before we could officially sponsor someone after our neophyte year.
Right. Yeah.
So it's critical and something that we definitely need more of. There's no doubt.
What kind of questions do you answer in that first beginning phase? Are they more practical questions about what the process looks like, how it was for you, or are they beginning to ask really deep theological questions? And sometimes do you feel like maybe you're wading out of your depth?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I've only really been in the process 1 year. I haven't had catechumens assigned to me who have come from different backgrounds. But having been part of the process for 1 year and seeing all of my other sponsors and companions talk to their candidates, it's really, it runs the gamut. It's all kinds of different conceptual questions, process questions, and they come from all kinds of different backgrounds, from people who have been atheists and people who have been, people who come from Bible-believing churches who know a lot about Scripture. It's one of the benefits of actually me coming into the process is you meet all of these converts who are really enthusiastic about the faith, and they know a lot about Scripture. So it's, for me, they honestly know more than I do a lot of times, and they can help with their questions. They can help me unpack my faith. So just, I guess I'm kind of getting away from what you originally asked, but I'd say, okay. No, it's definitely, it tests my ability, but it shouldn't be something that should deter any normal lay Catholic from wanting to help. The good thing is with these meetings is you're not alone.
Right.
So you don't have to field all the questions. We have, great catechists who instruct us on the faith.
Well, and the beautiful thing about the Catholic faith, like you said, is authority. You aren't the end all be all and the answer to everything. You've got plenty to go towards and to point them towards in answering questions. So you did not have a Catholic companion coming in through OCIA last year, but this is something new. But were there people that you met at Holy Name or met along the way, even outside of the parish, that were faithful Catholics that really helped you begin to unpack some of the questions you had and draw you deeper into really coming to know and love the Lord?
Yeah, in a way. So I'd say I probably had one Catholic friend that I knew from high school, and eventually coming back to Raleigh to work, we made contact again with each other, and he invited me to Mass. I think was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and that really did help break the barrier of, I'm not really sure I belong there. And, if I can't take the Eucharist, as someone who's not in the church, not baptized, not confirmed, I can't take the Eucharist. Is that a hindrance to me coming? How does the whole system work? I always felt kind of uncomfortable in those kinds of situations, but it really wasn't, too big of a deal. And it was, and I think the first time I went to Mass, it was at Holy Name, and it was fantastic. It was much different than where I had been before with, evangelical churches. It wasn't a stage and a lectern. It was the altar and the Eucharist. So I finally had a church to bring both my soul and my body into I guess, into agreement. There was an aim now and in my worship. So I think that helped initially. But for me, no, it was a lot of the online resources out there that helped kind of unpack the faith for me. So
where did you turn to, I guess, most frequently for online resources?
Oh, that's a good question. It would be Catholic Answers, Apologists, I think Joe Heschmeyer, Trent Horn, and the programs by Word on Fire. So Bishop Barron, huge.
Yeah.
And his programs about the saints, that helped a lot to kind of understand Catholic theology and what it meant to be a disciple. And yeah, those were huge.
Yeah, that we are so blessed at this time in history that there are so many resources for those who are curious about the Catholic faith to go and to just kind of dip a toe in your own house, in your own space, and start to explore. And, you know, a lot of us, myself included, can kind of live in fear of social media and the internet because there is a lot of harm that is done there, and there is a lot of evil that can be found there. However, we have people like Bishop Barron and Father Mike Schmidt and Trent Horn and Matt Fradd, and I mean, we could just keep on listing these incredible evangelists and apologists who are, like we say, sanctifying the airwaves, sanctifying what's happening on the internet, and it is really turning the tide. Whereas, you know, years ago, it would be, if someone was coming into the church, it had been a pretty long discipleship with a Catholic that they knew in real life, that eventually they kind of turned and began to see the truth of the Catholic faith, and they started to come to Mass, and they started into the RCIA program. But now so many people are evangelized in their cars or while they're cooking dinner. And I often say that we need to call Father Mike Schmidt and Bishop Barron and ask them why they're not sponsoring all these people that they're bringing into the church, and to really thank them for what they're doing. And so the position of a Catholic companion is all the more necessary these days than it used to be because of that. So we've seen in our diocese alone, I don't know if everybody heard this year, but we are the #1 growing diocese of convert to Catholic. And it's by far across our country by I can't remember the exact statistics, and I shouldn't quote it on the radio if I don't, but it's typically the average is 1 convert to every 400 and some odd Catholics. And here we're 1 to 70 some odd Catholics. That's a pretty significant difference.
As someone who saw that news and who told the catechists that I was working with about that, they were very, very excited to see that and to know that, you know, that's the fruits of their labor in a way.
Mm-hmm. And of our bishops. I mean, I think honestly, hearing that news in the Diocese of Raleigh has set the hearts of those who are who are OCIA catechists, who are in that part of the church's work. It set our hearts on fire because it's just, let's catch this wave and keep riding. It's very exciting to see. And the rite of election this year was even bigger than last year's rite of election at the cathedral. And they were practically falling off of the altar last year because there were so many. You were one of them, weren't you?
Yep.
Standing up there behind the altar.
I actually brought a book this time. I thought, they're going to do the same thing where they set up for the picture, but they didn't this year.
Yeah, they couldn't fit.
So many.
They couldn't fit. There were so many. And it's just amazing to see, especially Bishop's heart for the eastern part of our state and the eastern part of our diocese. I think that's really, we can point to that big time, that his heart for them has really brought in so many new Catholics, and he has done such good work with our mission churches out in the eastern part of the state.
Yeah. It's quite the mission for a bishop, let alone, you know, without even without the travel, it's quite the office, an administrative office, and especially this time of year during Holy Week,
Yes.
it can be a lot.
Oh, yes. I know that it's a lot just sitting in one little parish. I can only imagine the Office of Evangelization and all that they are having to do these next 2 weeks is just, but it's fulfilling. It's so joy-filled because it comes from a place of charity, of true overflowing, bubbling up kind of love, like the bishop inspires in all of us. I often say he's the most compassionate bishop in the world, and he really is. He in the best diocese in the world, right? Well, as you began to discern and come in and ask questions, at what point did you kind of have this realization that this is it? I've turned my face towards Rome in some sort of way, and I'm not turning back. What was that point for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think part of it was during the OCIA process, right before one of the rites to welcome me into the church. What they do is they typically have a phone call after the first few sessions, and what they're saying is, "Are you willing to enter the church and to begin this catechumenate process and learn?" And I don't think we had even had the talk about the Eucharist, but that's a big part of what I was exploring outside of the program. But we had the talk about church history and the church's role in the world and the Catholic social moral life and how that connected to their theology. And from there, I think it was, I was totally prepared, and I was like emphatic, yes, I'm ready to go. Yeah. And I think it was, a tour of the parish church, and I had never been so close to the altar, to the Eucharist, and then from there, I just had this drive to go to Mass. Daily Mass anytime I could fit in, and that was a very big period where I was just diving in, and my sponsor tells me, pull it back. You don't want to get absolutely sick of it, but I couldn't get enough.
You can't. Yeah, I couldn't either. Very much so. And I love just the way that there is a discernment process at multiple different points in the OCIA journey of, are you ready to take the next step? And it's not a September to April program, and because this is the date on the calendar, you go through this rite and then we move on to the next thing. It's not a given because it's so individual to each elect or catechumen and candidate as to where they are in this journey. It's not a given that this is the Easter Vigil for you, right? And so the discernment process before the rite of acceptance and welcoming that happens there is critical to move from pre-catechumenate to catechumenate. And it sounds like it was pretty significant to you at that point. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it was one of those times I remember, okay, the commitment for the OCIA is I think it's an hour and a half every Monday night, and then dismissal, which is you go to Mass and you hear the liturgy of the Word, and then you're dismissed out for reflection on the gospel for that Mass. So it's essentially a Monday night session of a lecture in small group, which is fantastic, and then one Mass a week going, as you would normally for your Sunday obligation. So it's not a whole lot, and it's invaluable. I mean, there are a lot of resources online, but still, even to this day, last Monday, I'm still learning things that I haven't learned from online resources. So it's a lot, and it's that discernment process. It's slow, catered, and it's not you have to believe everything right away. It's always have an open mind to what you're being taught, and eventually you'll get to the point where you have to make a declaration to say, okay, can I say all of these? You might be able to help me here. All of these affirmations at baptism to enter the church.
Right.
So, yeah.
So with making those points of discernment throughout the process of determining that, there is a bit of OCIA that's like Catholicism 101. You're learning, the nuts and bolts of Catholicism, but there's also a development of interior life as you go along that process. And I'm curious with the dismissal. That sounds kind of odd in our American ears in the 21st century, that we would tell people that they should step out for the rest of the Mass. We have a sense of entitlement to being in spaces. And so being dismissed during that portion and then going to reflect on the gospel reading, how did that help in the development of your interior life as you're processing all of the Catholicism 101 along the way?
I'd say it comes to, I think it was good that, from the beginning, they always, I guess, stress the precepts of the church, and to say you have to come to Mass, but you also have to be, I guess, in a state of grace to receive the Eucharist. And when you're coming into the church, you aren't in that state of grace. You aren't properly disposed to receive the sacrament. I think they do a very good job of explaining that, and the dismissal. It's often good in a way when they do the dismissal. You're in a small group with a catechist to lead you, and you can go and read through the sections of the gospel that they do in the liturgy of the word, and it's much more reactive, and you get to hear people's questions and what the teaching is. And it might be the same as the homily, but it's totally different when, week in and week out, you're hearing these lessons, and it's a great way to learn, and it's a big part of that process as you go, toward your confirmation day. It's great.
You had mentioned OCIA candidates who come from Bible-believing backgrounds, which Catholics are also Bible-believing, but that is how they distinguish themselves very much so, that, they have memorized Scripture. They, know the overall story arc of the Bible very well, and they also know, where to find everything. They can flip right to it. But in that small group setting of discussing the Scriptures, so you discuss the gospel, but you're also pulling in the other readings of the day. How does that help for you, as one who didn't necessarily come from that same background, help the Scriptures come alive and help you kind of get a firmer grasp? And, secondary question, the contributions of the Bible-believing background Christians coming in, how did that conversation impact your faith journey?
I think initially I didn't have a strong basis in, Scripture. I didn't have a good knowledge of it, but what it allowed me to do is to see the connectivity between the Old and the New Testament, to see that Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. And it's good to have all of the different, to have this diverse group of believers who are all of them are on fire for the faith. They really are. And they wouldn't be going through this process without, having that enthusiasm to seek the truth.
Right.
And so, when you have those people who can ask the right questions, when you might not have good prior knowledge of it, that's just huge. And it's why it's so infectious to be in OCIA and to keep coming as a lay Catholic. I mean, it's infectious. I really can't quite describe it, but it's great. Yeah.
Has your OCIA class kind of stuck together after going through the Paschal Sacraments together? Do you touch base? Do you continue with these kinds of great discussions around faith?
Yeah, I'd say, and I see them around town. It's definitely a small group, and you feel like you've gone through this journey with them. It's great. It's a small group, and there's, especially in the small group, parts of the program. So every Monday night we would have a session where it's probably an hour lecture and then 30 minutes of small group, and those are where the real connections are made. And it's it's an emotional. I mean, you're talking about religion, people's faith. People go and they find themselves in a really low point, and it's great to see the people who are so honest and have such an honest, I guess seeking out of the truth. It's just, it leads us to more of how do I need to act? How do I, where's my place in this church, in this community, and how to be a role model. I see role models. There are great Catholics out there. The very best are catechists. They really are role models for people who are seeking the faith, or Catholics who are trying to find that spark in their faith. It's a great process to be part of.
Yeah. Tell me about when you finally did have that class on the Eucharist, and what new insights, what fire it sparked in your heart, and did that kind of get you that much further in the discernment process to getting you towards your Paschal Sacraments?
Yeah. I think for me, I was a little weird in that I didn't know exactly the significance when it happened. I think it was good to know, the scriptural basis, what role it plays in the precepts of the church, how it is the source and summit of our Christian lives. But it was really spending time with the Eucharist, spending time in Mass, going to adoration, and then realizing, no, it wasn't. And then also hearing from other seekers at that time, I realized it wasn't the otherworldliness of the church. It wasn't the beauty of the cathedral or of the saintly spiritual writings that I was reading. It was the Eucharist. It was that devotion, and I suppose people can come to it in different ways, but that for me, that's the only way I could have done it, was through time and exposure to that. So,
You spoke about the first time you went into the actual church of Holy Name, and being so close up to the altar and so close up to the tabernacle, about how significant that was. Was that the beginning of your draw to the Eucharist?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but it was going in and just knowing where everything was, what was the purpose. For me, I had always wanted to keep kind of far away and just to observe, but to be there and kind of know how things worked, and how to treat the sanctuary, and just to be there. Yeah, that definitely, that was kind of the point where I was like, okay, I'm just drawn to go to Mass, to pray, and to have silent time with the Eucharist. It's a hard thing to describe, really, but daily Mass helped a lot. When you're there and there's silence and you have time to every day you can go and you can take the sacrament, and I'm glad I had that experience once I was baptized and I could take the Eucharist, that I could have that kind of be the reset for my day and to go forward on that. But it was that tour that was kind of the cliff that says, yeah, you're going to dive into this, and you're going to spend more time on it. And I mean, that's led me to where I am today, and willing to bring other Christians to that sacrament.
Yeah, it sounds like those kinds of tours, which many people might think are, kind of perfunctory. You go and you show people where everything is, but from the moment where you felt like you couldn't necessarily go in because you weren't baptized, you weren't confirmed, you couldn't receive the Eucharist, you didn't really know what to do, and you didn't feel like you belonged within the context of a Mass, to having that tour, to having somebody explain to you why we genuflect here, what we're genuflecting toward, why this thing is in this place, or this thing is in this place. It kind of, I think it sounds like it unlocked a lot for you to be able to feel like you actually are welcome here. And it's not us that's welcoming you, it's Jesus in the Eucharist, because this is where you get his physical presence.
Yeah. And it's odd that process and that moment, it unlocked for me other things that had happened in my past that I had not really registered at the time, but I realized, wow, that really was formative. I had mentioned before that my dad had been a lapsed Catholic, but really, so my granddad was, devout Catholic, but I wasn't really, there wasn't much of a push for me to have that kind of life. He would, say a blessing before meals. That was very formative. But I think my great aunt, so my grandfather's sister, two of his sisters were actually religious sisters. Mm-hmm. And I remember during a family funeral, we were in the Catholic church, probably the first time I had ever been to a Catholic church. And I saw my great aunt walk up to the altar and genuflect. Mm-hmm. And I was, at the time I thought, that's a little odd. What is that? Because I had never been exposed to that. Mm-hmm. But I think the more I thought about it, I'm glad I had that experience to say, there is something different there. There is something present, even if I didn't understand it,
What a blessing to have such an example in your heritage as well. Are they still living, your great aunts?
One of them is, yeah.
Yes. And so do they know about your journey into the church?
They actually don't. I don't think so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I probably need to get onto that.
Yes, I think they'll be so excited to hear.
Yeah, because I imagine it's very edifying, and I know they pray for converts like us, and I know that they've done a great job in serving the church. So,
is your grandfather still living?
No. So, he was a good example, but. For whatever reason, it took me so long to kind of figure out, okay, these are great examples. I was still at a point where I just wasn't willing to really seek it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. So many people have lost loved ones, and they talk about, the one place we get to be together. And that's in Mass, that where heaven meets earth, where the church universally is all together and can be together. And so people who've lost babies in utero, they talk about being able to sit in the pew with their whole family in one place. But the same goes for those grandparents that we love, and aunts and uncles and folks who have gone on. And I hope that there's comfort in that as you found your family here in the Catholic Church, but there's actual biological family too that was very well connected into it, that will continue as your prayer life deepens, as you pray for the holy souls in purgatory, and as you experience the fullness of our big, huge Catholic family that's not just the ones that are here looking at us on earth, but are throughout eternity. So as you have talked through your OCIA journey, you have kind of shed a lot of light for our listeners on how important that journey is, how important it is for Catholics to come and accompany people along the way, to be welcoming, to be to explain things, because us understanding and knowing kind of helps draw us in and feel like we're a part of it. And so I hope for our listeners, they can hear that each one of them has a place in this process as well, especially being in the greatest diocese in the whole world that now has this wonderful statistic that we're the fastest growing one in the country for converts. What advice would you give to those who are hearing who don't feel like they have the gift to be a catechist and would be intimidated to walk into an OCIA classroom and have that kind of leadership role? What role do they play for new Catholics and the seekers who are discerning into the church?
Yeah, it's huge, and that's a good question. I think there are, it's huge to have more and more sponsors just so we can cover the amount of people coming in.
We do need a lot of them.
It's, I believe I can only put one hand on one seeker at a time. But yeah, they have the ability to be themselves, to share their story with new seekers. One of the best things is they can listen to the seekers who come in. They can get to hear, stories of pain, stories of, people's search for meaning. And it improves my faith to be with converts. That's one of the big things I'd recommend for any lay Catholic is to talk to a convert or talk to a seeker, because they will give you some of their fire. They really will. And there's just so much to that. I'd say that it's not only, it's beneficial for lay Catholics to come in and help with the faith formation process, just for more education for yourself. Now, it might be hard to hear that and say, "Oh, I've been a Catholic all my life. What else is there to learn?" Well, we're the catechists. They're on the front lines, and while we're not exactly called to give a huge lecture in front of a bunch of people, we do help in small group. We do help field questions and to kind of tell our story to the converts who come. So it's, every little bit helps to the goal of saving souls. Now, Jesus is the one who saves souls, but there is a part for you to play in that as well. So
He's called us to be laborers in this vineyard. And there is a lot that we can do to walk alongside Christ in his good work with all of these souls who he is actively seeking out and calling to from the Eucharist. With many cradle Catholics, they've talked about exactly what you're saying, that being around converts is so exciting. Or folks who converted 30 years ago will say the same thing. Someone who's recently converted, there is a fire in them. There is an excitement because they've recently examined all the facts and made a very big decision that this is truth. And so they're committed to that decision. And so it is good to be around. But also, I have found that most Catholics will tell you that it's been a long time since their confirmation class, and there is much to be learned, especially, 2,000 years of billions of individual souls' experience with the Lord. There's a lot to learn, a lot to read. Reading the lives of the saints is one of those wonderful ways that we can experience that. And I've appreciated how I heard someone one time refer to the Catholic Church as your grandma's attic of experience and walk with the Lord, because unless it's, absolutely heresy and outside of Orthodox teaching of the Church, they just say, yeah, sure, come on in. We'll keep Faustina's diary, and we'll keep Augustine's Confessions, and we'll keep St. Thomas Aquinas because, nobody else has cataloged it like that. And so there's such a wealth in our saints and their writings and in the stories of their lives that inform us at different points in their lives. So have there been any saints that you have been reading recently that have really kind of brought light to your spirit as you're on this part of your journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say there's been a multitude. Certainly Thomas Aquinas. There's a lot to get into there.
You'll read him for the rest of your life, I'm sure, and still not exhaust it.
Yeah, certainly. Augustine as well. Just his journey to becoming a convert, to know that he was a catechumen as well, and he went through that process. And let's see, I think I'm reading, Catholic Controversy by St. Francis de Sales. Very, very good book. He kind of speaks on, during his time, at the time of the Reformation, he was kind of given a diocese in kind of Eastern France, and he's credited with a large number of conversions, but through a number of writings that he did and dispersed around and gave homilies on, he was able to convert all these people. And it was basically, and I'm making my way through it, a huge part of that was on just refuting exactly what the Protestant reformers were discussing, refuting the fact that the church isn't invisible, saying, questioning their arguments on authority. That's been a huge influence on, how I try to live. But it's kind of like all the saints you can imagine, just, St. Francis, St. Ignatius of Loyola, kind of the saints that had made asceticism a part of their lives. It's just amazing to see their devotion and their humility. That was really eye-raising, and it kind of brings a focus to, okay, I'm being called to live and to bear my cross. What does that mean? And so it's reading the saints that you're kind of given a name and an example to follow, which it's been great.
Yeah. So did you get to choose a confirmation saint? Who did you choose?
Yeah. I chose St. Paul.
St. Paul. Why did you choose St. Paul?
For me, I was really going into the epistles, especially at this time. 1 Corinthians was a big one for me as far as like the practical life of the church. Just he had such a beautiful way of expressing Christian theology and kind of showing us the way of Jesus Christ. And it was, that kind of opened my eyes, and to have such a conversion as he did, that really spoke to me as far as kind of where I came from. I didn't come to, for me, I was always an agnostic, to where I believed there was a God, and maybe I believed Jesus was God, but I didn't have the conviction that I was being called for anything.
Right. It didn't make any demand on your life like it does when you love God. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I get to teach confirmation class with teenagers, and so a lot of times they agonize who they choose as their confirmation saint. And I try to remind them, this is not the only saint you'll be friends with. So I'm glad to hear you chose St. Paul, but the list that you gave me that you've befriended since then is quite extensive at this point, and I'm sure it will continue to grow. There's a saint for every stage of our life, for everything that we go through. There are our best intercessors and our closest friends in our times of need, and so continuing to experience the fullness of faith through their eyes and through their perspective and through their intercession is what helps us along in our own journey towards sanctity. So thank you, Matt, for being with us and sharing your story. Especially, I am wildly curious about OCIA process all the time, and it's fascinating to me to hear really what it's like to walk that journey all the way through, and especially as the Eucharist seemed to be that driving force for you from the get-go, just of having to get towards that presence of Christ as closely as you could is just such a beautiful story. And I hope for all of our listeners, whether they are cradle Catholics or longtime converts, or just walking through a more stagnant time of life, that they'll hear your story of doing everything you can to get to Jesus in the Eucharist, and be encouraged to get back to Mass, to get close to the sacraments, and to call on that saint friend that they have for their intercession, and especially to call on our Blessed Mother for her prayers. So thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you also to our wonderful production team here at Divine Mercy Radio. You can listen to this episode again or previous episodes of Come to Me, in addition to all of our local programming, on our website at DivineMercyRadio.org/local programs. You can listen anytime on the free Divine Mercy Radio NC app or on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Come to Me. I am Lydia Tatum, and until next time, Jesus in the Most Blessed Sacrament, hear our prayer.